Welcome to Shakawa 3 overview of how this video was done. Now, if you haven't already seen this, you really should check out the animation that Egyptianboy did and posted on the forum under Character Test Spinning 360 file. He has it posted on his Facebook page, so you should visit that. But not only that, it's great in the sense that it's an awesome animation, but in addition, he's made it available so that you can look at it. Now, it's been up there for a while, but I've asked him if I can go through and kind of explain what's going on here, because some of these animations can be quite complex, and he said that was fine, and so I'm going to do that. So I'm thinking of creating a playlist like how they do that or something like that, and I'll walk through this animation and through a number of different videos to explain different parts of it in some detail. But to start off with, here we have the files that come when you download. Shakawa, I think, is how you pronounce it. If that's incorrect, somebody let me know. I'm sorry if that's not quite correct. But you have a number of different videos. One of them is the animation itself, and the other one is the character without animation. So that's really nice because you can kind of look at those. Okay, so let's get started. This video is just going to be an overview of the character and the animation, and I've cleaned things up in terms of the organization here in my Moho screen, just so that it's a little bit easier to see things. I've turned off the timeline for right now and the styles and things like that. But that's just so that you can see things. So the first thing that I want to do is let's take a look at the layers. And the first thing to notice is there's lots of layers, and that's to be expected. If you're new to Moho, you may have thought like I thought, which is you just create a couple of bones and move them around and you've got great animation. And that is true. You can do that for simple things. But for such a beautiful animation as this, animation in general is complex, and so that's just what you need to understand. It takes a lot of work, and you're doing some very complex things, and just to let you know that. Now, at this point, I want to compare this to another character and talk about one of the things about animation with Moho. And that question is, do we create a fully rigged figure that can do everything, or do we create specialized rigs depending upon the animation? Now, this character is one of the first characters that I created, and you can see I was trying to make it so that it can do just about anything, and has all the bones for the head and everything. Let me zoom in here. And I love animation, but I'm really my training is actually in the technical areas. I'm a computer programmer, and so my idea was to rig the full character. And I just love learning, so that was fun in itself. So I wanted to make the head turn. You know, the head turns was a big point of discussion on the forums when I first started, and make the head go up and down, and all these different things. So in a sense, I almost thought of it as a kind of 3D animation where you create essentially like a robot and control it with these controls. Now, if you do that, you will start to notice that it is very powerful, and you can get a really nice character that can do all kinds of things. But it does take a lot of time, and you'll start to notice that unlike 3D animation, there are quirks because this is a 2D program. And I shouldn't really say quirks, but there are challenges, such as, let me give you an example. So let's take this character, and if I do his head turn, I'm pretty happy with it. But for example, we see the hair looks a little bit strange and everything like that. But still, I was pretty happy with this. And let me turn him this way, pretty close to looking left, and let me combine that with the head down and up. Now we see a lot of distortion in terms of doesn't look natural at all. And trying to get that to look natural just with a simple control mechanism of two different bones is a bit complex. So on the forums, there's all kinds of discussions of very complex and fancy rigs that can get these things in a simple way to combine properly. Another alternative is just to have lots of different controls, because you'll notice as the controls are at the 0 position, and for most of mine here, that means the arrow is pointing up, the control bone is pointing up, then it doesn't have an effect. So I can move each bone independently, or I can combine them together. So I could have lots of different control bones controlling different looking of the head, and they could look in different directions just by moving the individual bones. So that's one approach, and that may be something that you're thinking of if you're new to Anime Studio or Moho now. But like I said, I found that took me lots and lots of time, and I was spending more time constructing characters and learning how to work around binding and doing smart bones and all these different things than actually animating. So in contrast to trying to create a robot that can do everything, the traditional animation, of course, has individual pictures. So here I took the Shakawa character and rendered it out as individual frames, and we'll just look at a couple of these. And so what is actually happening in the animation, of course, is that it is actually just resulting in a number of still images. So you can use Moho that way. Here we've created a switch layer, and you can draw whatever you want in traditional animation style, and then just create keyframes in the timeline and create an animation that way. And that's really what we're resulting in here. And so we see the beautiful turning of the character as it moves across the screen, and it's just a result of the individual pictures here. So that leads me to one key point, especially for people who are beginning in Moho, is that at the end of the day, it's all about animation itself. And so the artists who are very skilled in the principles of animation will create beautiful animations. And it's not just about bones and moving bones. Those bones should be seen as tools that allow you to do very powerful things, but you don't even have to use bones to create animation in Moho. So let's go ahead and start diving into the Shakawa character and what Egyptianboy did. And he has a combination using the bones properly, and also just his great animation capabilities. So as we can see here, we've got a number of bones that are allowing you to manipulate the character. It's hard to see, but you've got arm bones here as well, and body and bones for the legs, but also control bones for the body turning and for the head. So he's used bones quite a bit. And also, he has cycles here, and some just beautiful animation that we'll show later as well. So the approach is kind of a middle approach in the sense that he's creating a rig that can do lots of things, but he's not trying to make the rig do things it wasn't designed to do. He's using it for what it is designed to do, to surface the animation. Okay, so let's start by looking at a very high level. Here are the layers here, and I have in my little variation of this, I didn't want to mess up his animation, use it as a baseline, and so I just saved a copy as a Moho. And in here I've modified the names just a little bit so that you could see what they are. I'm not going to go through each individual layer names, but just to keep track of things. And so you see that we've got a stars layer, which deal with the stars over her dizzy head, and the hand, a group layer that's controlling the hand, or bone layer, and then Shakawa, all of the Shakawa stuff. And then notice we've got the shadow, and then we've got the box. Now there are some other layers that were not used in the animation that he presented, and you can use these. You could have that. So that's another thing to be aware of, is that as you create your animations, you may have any number of layers that you don't show in the rendering, either because you were trying out things, or you may want to have different views, like you could have a different kind of box, or a background or something like that. But in the rendering that he shows, you can turn those off. So that's one thing to notice as well. So that's the basics of the organization, and we will dig into more detail on that in just a second. But I wanted to show something here. As we do the animation, as you run the animation, notice that on frame 0, the character is centered, where you would want to construct it in the middle. And as the animation plays, though, of course, the very first thing, if you're new to Moho, is the first frame is where you set things up. And so in frame 1, the character is off to the side, and the character moves in and turns around as the character is moving. And the interesting part here is, first, let's talk about what's happening when we go to the all layer. So the all is a group layer that's allowing you to control the animation as a whole. And in that, you can look here. Now we start looking a little bit at the timeline. And what's happening here is we have the layer ordering changing. And so as we move around, notice that look over here at the layers as we do this. As I scrub the timeline, when we get to frame 26, we will change the layer ordering. So we can look at that. And you can see. And what's happening is, specifically, what you'll notice is that he's changing the layer ordering so that the hand, as it comes up, will go in front of the character and then behind the character, and in front of the character and behind the character. And so you can see that's what's happening here. It's in front, and then right at the top here, he's going to switch it. Now it's behind. And he comes and then switches in front and behind. So that's the first thing we can see. The next thing is, if you're trying to analyze what's going on in this and learn how to make better animations, you may find that as you're trying to figure out, how does this character turn around so well? What's going on here? What you may find is that the character moving across the screen is a little bit challenging, and the size can be challenging. So the character moving across the screen, all they have done on this animation here is we do a layer transformation. So let me bring up the tools here, and that's just this layer transform, and I'll move that to the side. And so we see that at frame 1 it's there, and then at frame 25 it's moved across there, and then there's a little bit of movement, but that's really probably more that either I clicked on that or Egyptianboy clicked on it later. It's really basically the same as this other position, so you can see that. You can see how if we look up here at position X, Y, and 0, it's not really changing, so it's really just a copy of that, so there's no real animation there. So if I didn't want to see her move across the screen, I can just actually delete those keyframes. Now, again, make sure before you play around with that file, you probably want to save it, and that's what I did here. I'm not going to save this one. So you can see now I can look at the character a little bit more closely, and she's just turning around and all the animation's happening in one spot. And of course, this one right here where we zoom in and out is this camera zoom. And again, if we zoom out, we can see the entire animation noticed by this brown line here, and that's when the animation stops. And there are no other keyframes along this channel here, so you know that that's the only thing that's happened with this camera is we've zoomed in right there. So if I want to look in close up, I can just delete that keyframe as well. And now it's a little bit easier for me to kind of analyze what's happening, because really all I'm focusing on here is the animation of the character herself. Isn't that beautiful right there? Look at that wonderful movement of the character. Just wonderful. Okay, so now that we've talked about animating on the all layer, let's take a look at some of these other layers. I have already created a video on the stars, so you might want to check that one out. But you'll see here how these stars move around, and you can see some animation on that layer. And then if I click on hand, we can see that I'll do another video just specifically on the hand and how that moves, and you can see the animation there. What he's doing a lot here is the bones, so that's primarily bones that are happening with the hand. And then for all, if we open that one up a little bit, let's close most of these others. We see there's quite a number of layers here, and that's typical for characters. We see a very interesting thing here, that what he has done cycles. And that's a very helpful thing, because this character is going to move round and round and round. And so this is actually a cycle. So he only had to create a couple of keyframes, a few keyframes here, and then they just continue to repeat. And the character turns around, and you can see that these bones are moving around. Another thing that's happening, if you'll notice here, is that we've got the layer flipping. So we go, let me zoom in on the layers here, and we can see that basically he creates a keyframe here, the starting of the character, and then really, he doesn't have to create all these individual positions. He just comes to this point, and that's what these circles are, the keyframes, and he comes to this position, frame 10, and he sets up the character this way. And the way he does that is by moving this bone. And so the first thing that we can notice is that this BD turn is a bone that turns the character away from the camera. So notice here, this is also an interesting point here, is that the character is initially constructed in a 3/4 view. And that is a very good thing to do, because most of the animation are very common. A lot of animation can be done in the 3/4 view. And so he starts with that one as his base view, and then just for his bone turns away. Now typically what most people might do is just create the character looking straight at you and then have the bone turn left or right, but he's starting with the 3/4 view. And so that bone turns the character away. Then the next thing that happens is on frame 11. The very next frame, what he's going to do is flip the entire screen, and so there we go, flip. And he freezes these bones. That's what happens here. And now he will move this BD tune back to the middle, so the character turns back toward you. So it's really kind of the inverse of turning away. Now the character is turning toward you. Then from that point, he's going to, this bone will come up to the middle, and now he starts to use these other bones, because these other bones are moving the character toward the camera. Okay, so we're moving in. And so what we have here is the BD face is actually the body facing you. So face is not like a head face, but facing you. So this bone will turn the character towards you, so as you move it down. So that's why he's got two different bones. You can actually combine them into a single bone if you know about bones and everything, but it's depending upon how you want to set up the controls. So this one is turning away, turning the body away, and this one is turning the character to face you. And this other bone, this face X, is actually dealing with her pigtail. It's moving the pigtail, and so that just keeps it in sync. And so he's got some little tweaks here that go on, and you can see different bones being moved and everything. So, but right here he's doing that same key flip, a frame flip. So we see that same kind of thing. So now the character is back in the original orientation, and he can now face the character back to the 3/4 position just by moving these bones back up into their original position. So that's what's happening in the spinning turn. So now I'm going to zoom in a little bit and show you something here at both of these flipping keyframes. And I'm sorry it's kind of crowded. We're doing 1280 by 720 and just don't have as much to show. It's not as easy to show both the timeline and the character, but hopefully you can see this. So the thing that I wanted to show is pay attention. Now let me turn off the arm So let's find the arm. I think this wrong one. This is the left arm there. Okay, so look at how this arm, as it's constructed, and there's a little part of her dress strap there. Notice that it aligns almost exactly with the body position. And so, same thing for the other arm. Let me see if I can find the dress and click that off. It's a little bit more over here, but the interesting thing is, as I go to the next layer, the next frame, we don't see a lot of popping. And that kind of thing is the thing that we have to be careful of when you're creating a character that turns and everything. So he has done a very good job that as this character is turning, it doesn't look like there's a lot of popping. There's some, but knowing exactly what you can do as you go from one frame to the next, that is something that you just have to study. You could look at the Animator Survival Kit and other different things that show you traditional animation, because that will help you understand how much you can move these things. So let me show you an example. So here's one of the first characters I did, and I was pretty proud of this. I really had a good time. I learned, so did the head turn here and a body turn, and you can change the feet positions and things like that. But the thing that I want to show you, and let me zoom in, well, let's leave it out here because I think you can probably see it better. In the body turn, I'm turning the body, but look at the popping. Notice that there's this popping that's going on. And of course that's because I'm going from such a radical difference in the single frames. Now if he's moving more quickly, then maybe it's not as noticeable. But the strange thing is, when I was actually creating this character, it took me quite a long time. I was learning how to do Anime Studio at that time, but I didn't even notice the popping until I actually created an animation with this character. So that's something that you want to be aware of as you're dealing with your characters. And here I have a very, kind of the chubby feeling, and so these rounded arms. But notice in that, because of that, where I have it positioned, there's going to be a big change as I move this character. So as you think about your character construction, think not only about what makes it look nice and makes it look good, but how difficult it is to animate. Let me give a couple of other examples here. Here's another character that I animated a while ago. And again, trying to do these head up and down kind of things, and the head turns. And so this character, notice that I've got his hair kind of hanging out to the side, and I thought that was kind of cool. But as I do this, I have to think about how does this hair look as he turns. So I'm just moving the points with this bone as he animates. But notice also I have to do lots of things with this because it's moving all these bones. So when I construct the action for this head turn, there's lots of things like the ear has to go behind, the bones have to move, and so it can be quite complex. This took a whole lot of time for me to figure out how to do this. Let me give you one more example. So let's look at this little crazy professor character, and I really love this guy, and I just have him, with some wild hair, and you have the head turn, but just think about this now. Maybe if you're an expert in drawing, and I like drawing, and I think I'm okay, but it took a long time to figure out how to create this hair and how to move it, because it's got all of these different points, and I'm moving it in all these different, moving it in these directions, and so I want it to all look like a unit that's moving. So this took me quite a bit of time to get that to work. So I've gone into the hair, and you can see there's lots of points, and that's the front part of the hair, and there's some back hair that does it behind his head that does that as well. But notice all these points. Now I don't even know if it's harder or easier in the newer version of Moho that has the Bezier curves, that has the handles and everything else. But I didn't actually have to create a whole bunch of keyframes, but it took me a long time to figure out exactly where each of these points should go. So that's literally what I had to do as I'm turning this head with all this hair. I had to figure out and move these points, each one of these points, where I want them to be. So my point, no pun intended, is that not so much bones versus not bones, or head turn versus not head turn, or anything else like that, but rather thinking about the construction of your character and how simple or complex it should be. Let's take a look at Shakawa's hair as an example. So look at this character and all the different points that I have on that character. Okay, so here I've just created a version of Shakawa that's just the head with no animation. And what I'm going to do is just to show you how the hair is constructed, and I'm just looking real quickly at an overview. What we're going to do is turn off all of the layers actually. So now, with the layer visibility turned off, I can just, and I'm on frame 0, and I can just select the layer, and by clicking on that just makes it easy to see the points that are associated with the hair. And notice though, even though Shakawa has this kind of crazy hair similar to that crazy professor that I had, it's really only a few points in a very basic shape. And notice that he's got a couple of shapes in here. We've got this little shape here, that's 1, 2, 3 right there. 3 very simple shapes here, and a 4th simple shape, and then the main hair itself. So when you construct your hair, you can do something like that. And notice I'm in Moho 12, so if I click this button, the selection button, we can just see the points. If I'm in the Transform Points tool, depending upon whether I've got these tools turned on or not, let me not select them all, you may see the control handles. So if you don't want to see those control handles, you can turn them off, and that affects how the curves work, but here we're just looking at the points. So again, the point that I'm trying to say is that this hair is simply constructed, but it's done extremely well because he knows exactly which points are needed. So that's very important to help your animation. And then we also have the bangs. So again, 3 simple shapes. The pigtail, we can see that's a little bit more complex, a little bit more points, but still fairly simple. It's really just kind of a triangle. Pigtail on the top, again a number of points, and some yellow band here for her ribbon to tie up her hair, and things like that. So that's just to kind of notice about those points. I'll do another video later on that just talks about the head turn itself and the body turn and things like that, but I just wanted to show the shape of the hair here. Okay, let's go through just a couple more quick overview things and we'll finish up this video. But like I said, this is such an enjoyable character and very interesting, so I will be creating some other videos if you are interested in this, and we'll see all the different, just dive into all the little nuances here of this beautiful animation here. Okay, so in this one I've removed that transformation of her moving into the field of view, but we have all the normal animation of her spinning and becoming dizzy and things like that. So notice that I've got the Shakawa all, so we're focusing on the animation of the entire character here, and we see the keyframes. And as I mentioned before, here's the cycle of her spinning around and around. But how does she become dizzy? Well, if we zoom out a little bit, we see that at frame 120, so the cycle will just continue and continue until you have a new keyframe that basically tells it, okay, stop that animation and start something else. And so right here, we stop the turning around, and now he goes into a different animation here, and you can see all these bones moving, and so here's that dizzy kind of animation going on. Alright, so some animators might do that in a completely different file, but it's nice that it's included here, that we can see this and the stars come up and all of the things going on here. So we've got the two phases, the spinning around in a circle, and then here we add these keyframes. Now, an interesting thing here too is, let's take a look at the eyes. So we'll open up the head here, and we have the eyes, and notice that it's a switch layer. So let me zoom in here, and we see all the different eyes, and we have different positions. So let's go all the way back to the beginning, and we have different types of eyes. We've got closed, and we have open and looking straight at you. And so he's using switch layers in this particular situation. In some characters, you may have lots of different bones that can manipulate the eye looking in different directions. Here he's just got these switch layers, and the interesting thing is you see all this expressive power going on with the character. So what's happening with that is she gets dizzy. You know, her eyes are moving around, but he's using switch layers. What's going on there? So we can see here, first of all, if I click on the eye group layer itself, if you're new to Anime Studio or to Moho, what's going on here is that's where you're switching between the different eyes. So in frame 0, his default one shows these eyes open, the X2. We'll get to that in a second. But in frame 1, he selects the X eyes, that open looking at you, and it stays that way until around frame 67, and then we switch. We're going and switching the layers here. We're switching between the different eyes, and if you don't know, you can interpolate. As long as these points are the same, you can interpolate between the different layers, and so that's why you may have lots of points or whatever more than you might need, because you may be interpolating between layers. So as you can see this going on right here. So that may be what you want to do. So he's using switch layers, but the interesting point that I want to show is on the eyes that are kind of going crazy, this X2 here, notice that there's a cycle here. So let's zoom in closely on that, and what we see is different positions of the eyes. Now, to make it a little bit easier to see, what we'll do is I'll turn off the animation for her turning around. So I've turned off the animation of her head turning around just by deleting them. Of course, I don't want to save that. And now if we look, basically what's happening is that these eyes are just going around, and it's very simple. The eyes are up, then the eyes are kind of in the middle. And so we have frame 1, 2, and he comes back. So he's just got a couple of positions that these eyes are coming around in. And like we said, it's a cycle, and so it goes round and around. Now here's the interesting part. So what happens with the eyes, so as she's looking at you, the eyes don't seem to be moving. But in reality, if I actually, let me go ahead and put a keyframe in here, and if I actually had the X2 layer, we would see that they are moving around in this X2 layer. They're moving around. So this whole time, while she's spinning around and I'm sorry, let me go ahead and delete this keyframe. While she's spinning around, her eyes aren't moving because it's in a switch layer. And you're switched on and looking at this X. But then eventually, let me zoom out a little bit, when we get to the place, and as she's switching at these different layers, we don't see the eyes spinning because it's not the layer that is spinning. But here, notice that he goes to the X2, and if we take a look at this, and as we move along, we see that we're never selecting the X2 layer until frame 120, and now from that point we see those eyes moving around. So they've been moving around this whole time, but you just didn't notice it because it wasn't in that switch layer. Okay, and so I think the last thing that I'll mention is that as you look, if you've downloaded this animation and you've brought it into your version, you may be looking at things and you'll notice again that certain layers may not be used, and maybe they're turned off or whatever. I've cleaned this one up and gotten rid of the ones that were turned off and aren't used in the animation just so that I could show you. But that's something you might want to think about. If your character is more generic, it may have different layers that you don't use in a particular animation. So that's the balance between how general is your character and how specific is it to the animation. And the last thing that I'll mention is that if you are analyzing this, let's say that you're new to Moho, or you're just wanting to learn some new techniques and just really like this animation, or other ones, other characters that you're looking at, like all the characters that come with Moho, and you want to analyze how did they do that. It's a good idea if the layers are not clear for you to understand. Renaming the layers is pretty safe. However, if you're new to Moho especially, I would not encourage you to rename the bones. And the reason why is because the actions, the smart bone actions, depend upon the name of the bone. And so if you don't get these things all set up, and then when you change the name, you may have to actually reset the animation. So even though if the bones are not really labeled in the way that makes sense to you, I would not encourage you to relabel them when you're first starting. So, but again, relabeling the names of the layers is fine. Oh, I've got a couple of other points that I wanted to mention. One is that as you're analyzing things, be aware that as I click, it may create keyframes. Notice you didn't see it, as I'm moving around, but if I look down, there's lots of different keyframes. I may be actually creating keyframes as I'm clicking around and just trying to look at the thing. So if you're analyzing, it's very important to think about whether to keep a copy that isn't messed up and don't save it. And when you want to close, you may have accidentally created some keyframes. So be careful about saving if you're analyzing stuff. And the other thing that I wanted to show you that I forgot to mention, and that is this display quality here. So we can, right next to that, we can click this box and turn off the bones so we can see things a little bit better. But in particular, something that I want you to see is the masking. So let me bring back the version that has the animation. Okay, so now we have the version that has the animation going on, and here's the interesting thing that I want to show you here. Especially if you are of the type of person that is trying to create this robot kind of character where it can just do everything and you just control it like a 3D character or whatever. One of the things that I did when I first started doing that is trying to make everything look correct at the right angle. So this character is a particular example. As I turn the head, I tried to make it such that the mouth and the expressions in the nose and the eyes and everything is looking correct as I turn it. And I maybe didn't do such a great job, but it's kind of tough with these vectors as opposed to just drawing. But in any case, my focus was spending a lot of time on trying to get this correct. And in particular, if we think about it, that's why I'm stopping at the 3/4 version, is that what happens as he moves toward a profile. So getting this head to give a 360 turn like Shakawa does that's kind of challenging. And part of that, we'll get into that in more detail, deals with the eyes and things like that. Because I use masking on the eyes, and we talk about nested masking, and I'll get into that in a different video. But as I was creating this head turn, trying to get it so that, whoops, accidentally hit something here, and you can see that double bone stuff as we talked about, one of those problems there. Trying to get it so that it ended at the right place and didn't go off the edge of the face and things like that was a challenge. So here's the thing that I wanted to show you with respect to Shakawa. They take an easier approach to deal with that so that she can easily get the 360 turn. And how to do that, let me move this up so you can see it a little bit better. And that is, hopefully you can see this, the masking. So underneath display quality, click on masking. And he uses masking here, and I'm sorry, my mouse is double clicking sometimes, and we can see the polka dots actually are off of the dress. And so let me show you a little bit more about that. So as we scrub the timeline, it's actually polka dots that are moving on and off the dress. And so what that does, why that's helpful, is because it makes the animation of these polka dots very easy to animate in the turn, and yet it still gives you a very believable version of the dress. Same thing for the eyes. Let's take a look at that. So as she turns, notice, let's look very closely at these eyes. Notice that it is not a humongously complex movement of these points as if you were really drawing this on the character, but rather it's a fairly simple, there is a little bit of change in the eyes, and we'll look at that more closely when we look at the head turn. So there is some perspective going on with respect to that, but in general the animation is fairly simple in terms of it just moving across the screen a little bit, and it's really the face that's changing shape more. And you can see this especially with the mouth, right? There's a little bit of perspective going on, but not an incredible amount. And it's what he's done is the face is a mask, and we'll look at that in more detail. But my point was that when I turn on the display quality and turn on or masking on or off, then you can no longer see that issue of the eyes actually moving off, and it looks, just like she's really just turning. So a key point here is, again, the techniques. How can you do the techniques so that it's easy for you to do the animation, easy for you to construct a character, and it makes a very pleasing and beautiful animation. So that's one of the very interesting things to study in this particular character. So I hope you've enjoyed the animation in Egyptianboy. If you see this one, I hope it's doing justice to your character. You've done a wonderful job, and I really love it. I think it shows a situation that Moho doesn't have to create very stiff animations. They can be very flowing, very beautiful, and you don't even have to use all the tools we'll talk about in the hair. The pigtails have a very flowing, and the arms have a very flowing dynamic view, but he didn't use the dynamic tools. And that you don't need to. You use what is good for the animation. So I hope everybody's enjoyed this, and look for more animations. Might take me quite a while. My main job is writing computer programs. I just do this because I love it and I enjoy learning. So as I have time, I'll create other animations. If nobody else is interested, that's fine, because I love it and I'm learning it for myself. But if you enjoy it, I hope you have some fun, and talk to you later.